Welcome to Tech Brothers. In this video, we're going to learn how to create and configure load balancer for our AG listener in Microsoft Azure. We have already created AG listener. However, we cannot connect to our AG listener from any server but the primary replica. In order to resolve this issue, you have to create a load balancer in your Azure Portal and then configure your load balancer to link with your existing cluster where your AG listener role is running, and then you'll be able to connect with your AG listener. So these are the high-level steps that we need to take in order to create and configure load balancer. First, create internal load balancer. When I say internal, there are two types of load balancer. You can create internal and you can create external. External is more if you are going to expose your AG listener or your SQL server or your application internet facing, then you will create the external load balancer. But in this video, we'll create internal load balancer because we want our servers that's internally in our network to be able to connect to our AG listener. So doing so, number one, we will select the right resource group in our portal, and then we will select the right type. As I said, it's going to be internal in this demo type of the load balancer. And then we will select the right availability set. Availability set, if you watch my previous videos, basically it contains your number of virtual machines. Since in this cluster we have only two nodes, SQL 1 and SQL 2, so I have created a separate availability set. So we'll use that availability set to configure our SQL virtual machines interfaces on our load balancer. And then we have to configure the front-end IP of our load balancer. This IP has to be the same as your AG listener IP. If you configure a different IP address on here, then you still won't be able to connect because that's the same as AG listener. I'll show you in a second. And then we will configure backend pool, configure health probe. That is going to be very important because we have to configure health probe port in our later on in our script when we run the PowerShell script. And then we'll configure our AG listener port on the load balancer as well, which is 1433. You can take a look from your SSMS and go to your listener properties and see that what IP address and what port it is using. Then we'll run the PowerShell script to configure cluster to use the load balancer, and then we'll test our connectivity. So let's go ahead, go to our portal and create our internal load balancer. So right here is my portal. So if I go on load balancer, you will see that this screen right here, right now we don't have any load balancer. In order to create load balancer, you can click on create load balancer right here. And this is the default resource group, but we already have the resource group. So let's select our resource group. In my case, it's TBS AG resource group and then TBS SQL resource group. So I'm going to select on TBS SQL right here, the resource group, and name. This is your load balancer name. So I'm going to select SQL load balancer, and our type would be internal. And virtual network, we already have the virtual network, so we'll use this virtual network, and you can see the subnet default is 10.0.0.0. and the IP assignment is going to be dynamic. So click next and then click next and create it. Validation passed, so let's click on create. And our deployment is underway and is completed. Let's go to our load balancer again and configure it. All right, this is our load balancer. First thing, we need to configure front-end IP configuration. Click on that. Click this, and we need to make it static. This IP address again needs to be the same as your existing AG listener. So in my case, it's 27. If I go back to one of my node and right click and go to the properties, of my listener. As you can see, the IP address is 27 and port is 1433. Let's cancel this and go back to our portal. So IP address is static and 10.0.27 is front-end IP configuration for our load balancer. Click Save. Okay, it's saved. Let's go back and finish other configuration. Backend pool. Right now we don't have backend pool, so let's click on Add. SQL backend pool BP and associate it to availability set. This is where we'll select the availability set, and we have availability set right here. TBS SQL AS, it has 2 virtual machines. These are our SQL nodes, so we're going to select those and then click on Add Target Network IP Configuration, and then we will select each node one by one. As you can see that this is SQL 01, one node, and then IP address for that is 30. Click Add Target to add the second node. So we'll select add the second node and network IP address, and click OK, and it's saving the backend pool configuration. Alright, backend pool settings are saved, and you can see that it has 2 virtual machines. Let's click on Health Probes and create one. SQL Health Probe. Protocol TCP/IP is going to be internal, so I'll keep the port 80. It took it on its own since we selected that it's internal. Usually if you select external, this port would be like 4-digit, like 32, 31 or something like that. Rest everything remains the same. We'll just click OK, and it'll save the probe setting. Created probe, completed successfully. Let's click on load balancing rules. This is very important. Without this, it will not work. Nothing will work for us. Click add, and I'll just SQL load balance rules, IP address this, frontend IP, TCP IP. So we're gonna do right here the TCP IP backend and frontend 1433. That is the IP address for our listener. Rest everything remains the same. Click OK and wait for the saving. Once this is created, then we'll move into next step. All right, saved load balancer rule, that's completed. Rest we don't need to configure in NATs and properties. We don't need to do anything with them. We are done with creating our load balancer in our portal. Right here is the name, resource group TBS SQL resource group. And now we can go back to our cluster and configure the cluster to use this load balancer. So this is a node 2. We need to go and open our cluster. Fill over cluster manager and take a look on our cluster. We need to run the PowerShell command in order to configure this load balancer to use this cluster. I want to minimize this. So here's our cluster. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Expand this. I'll show you a script in a little bit, but this is our cluster IP right here. And if we right click on it and go to the properties, let's go to the properties of this cluster to get the name of the cluster. So name of our resource right here, if you take a look, networks SQL AG cluster. Let me bring up let me go to the other machine and get the PowerShell script that we're going to run. This is the PowerShell script that we are going to run. You can run this PowerShell script on any of the node and it should work fine. So basically it needs the cluster resource resource name. You can run PowerShell and run this get cluster resource name, and it'll actually bring your cluster resource name and then the listener name right here and the listener IP address. These are all in the variables, and then it's going to use those variable values right here in the commands right here. So one thing I wanted to mention, if you use this script, make sure that the port in our case was 80. If your port is different, you need to change this port right here. And you can leave rest of the stuff exactly the same and it should work fine for you. So I'm going to just copy this and run PowerShell as an administrator. right click and run as admin. Let's make it, and right click and paste it. All right, we have warning here that the properties have taken place, everything has run successfully. However, the IP address needs to be offline and online again right here, as you can see. So we will go in our cluster, minimize this. I'll go ahead and take it offline and bring it online again. And then we will go into the listener and do the same thing so that everything will take place. So go in the roles, click on your availability group right here and click on resources and expand this AZTBS. We need to bring this offline and then bring it online again. If you bring all the resources offline and run the script, you will not get that warning, but I forgot to do that. That you could bring everything offline and run that script and bring online again. It will work fine, but this way it works fine as well. So bring it online. And I'm going to bring my resource group online. Everything is looking good. Now let's go ahead and test the connectivity. Refresh our SQL servers. Right here, I'm going to refresh, close this one. Disconnect this and I'll connect again with the SQL servers. Connect, expand that availability group and see that which one is primary and which one is secondary. SQL 01 is secondary at the moment, and SQL 02 is the primary. And if we go expand our listener, AZTBS listener, let's take a look at this right here, TBS SQL 02. This is my SQL 2 node. So if I connect with the listener on this node, I should be able to connect it with no issues. But our previous issue was that when we go onto the node 1, we were not able to connect. So now let's go on node 1 right here. Let me close this, minimize this, and let's go and connect with our listener right here, AZTBS SQL listener. As you can see, even though it's a secondary replica, we were able to connect with our listener. So another connectivity is that you can I'm going to go in one of my DNS here, or you can go on any other application server and try to use ODBC and try to connect with the your listener. You should be able to connect. So let's go ahead and failover and test it on 02 as well. So I'm going to failover from 02 to 01, and then we will go in TBS 2 and connect with our listener to see that if everything is working there as well. Failover. And I'll put this script in the description. You can search this script on internet as well. The PowerShell script that we ran, without running that PowerShell script, it will not work. Click close, refresh, and we're going to disconnect that since it's our secondary now, and let's try to connect with our listener from here as well. And there you go. We have no problem connecting with our listener now. So basically this is it for this video. This is how you configure your load balancer, and then link your load balancer to your cluster and the roles that's inside the cluster. And I hope this helps.